Outdoor furniture is crazy expensive. It can cost you well over $2,000 for a wooden outdoor sofa, not to mention the chairs, the tables, and everything else. And when I had a deck to fill with furniture, I was not about to pay those prices. So today, I'm gonna show you the 6 DIY outdoor furniture projects I built for my back deck that look absolutely amazing. I saved over $7,300 versus buying them on my own, and I'm gonna show you how you can build them too.
Since this is an outdoor sofa, I'm using my favorite exterior wood, cedar. Cedar can come in many different colors from dark to light, so I started by sorting the 2x4 so I could get matching colors to pick the best pieces for each part and mark them with chalk. I started cutting down the parts on the miter saw and cut everything I needed for the side armrest assemblies. Using a stop block here really makes short work of cutting all these repetitive parts. I took the 8 parts to make up both sides and started the assembly. I drilled some 3/8 of an inch holes halfway through the tops of the armrest on each end. After putting on some glue, I drove 2.5 inch screws into the holes to join the boards. I'll fill these holes later with cedar plugs for a nice look. You could also use pocket holes here and in most of the other parts of this build if you prefer that method. I repeated this process for the other side, and before moving on, I drilled some holes at the bottom of each of the assemblies to attach to the base of the armrests. I set the armrest aside, and next I started cutting plugs for the holes with a 3/8 inch plug cutter in my drill press. A plug cutter is kind of like a drill bit with a hollow center. It gives you perfectly matched plugs because you're using the same material as the rest of your project. If you don't have a drill press or a plug cutter, you can always buy cedar dowels for the plugs. I glued the cedar plugs in place and used a little bit of cedar sawdust rubbed into the glue to fill any small gaps. Next, I cut the base stretcher that runs between the 2 armrests on the bottom. This was initially just a design element, but it ended up adding a lot of stability to the whole sofa. I went ahead and cut the boards for the front and the back of the seat at the same time since they are similar measurements. I find it's easier to go ahead and knock out all the same size parts at one time so that you don't mess up the measurements. I flipped the stretcher and bottom armrest pieces upside down and drilled some pilot holes and then attached them with 2.5 inch screws. Again, I could have used a pocket hole jig here, but I wanted to make a point on this build that you don't even really need a pocket hole jig to easily make something like this. I turned the stretcher assembly right side up and used glue, a clamp, and some 2.5 inch screws to attach the armrests using the holes I pre-drilled earlier. I later went back and plugged these holes too with some of the cedar plugs. Next, I moved on to the seat base. I cut 4 short boards to go along with the front and backs I'd already made. 2 of these boards will be inner supports, and they need notches cut in them to hold the 1x4 seat slats. I laid out the notches on the boards and then took them over to the table saw and used a dado blade to cut them out. You could also do this by making a series of cuts within the notch area with a circular saw and then clearing them out with a chisel. I cut some cleats from 2x4 boards which I'll use to support the outer ends of the 1x4 slats, and then I ganged together all the 1x4s and cut the slats to length. With all the parts for the seat base ready, I began assembly. I turned all the boards upside down so the tops would be flush against my assembly surface. Then I joined the outer frame with glue and some 2.5 inch screws, using clamps along the way to help square things up. For the inner supports, I spaced them evenly between the outer edges and secured them with screws as well. I flipped the seat over and then I used the 1x4 slats to align the cleats. The slats should be flush with the outer frame, so I clamped them in place and checked the position with a scrap board. When the board was flush, I attached the cleats with 2.5 inch screws. The final part of the seat base was to attach the 1x4 slats. I laid all the slats in place on the cleats and in the notches, and then I secured them with 1.5 inch screws. Next, I moved to the seat back. From 2x4s, I cut 4 uprights with 15-degree angles on the bottom. The uprights will be connected by 1x4 slats similar to what I did on the seat base. I laid out the notches, clamped all 4 parts together, and cut them with the dado stack just like before. The uprights were a little bulky, so I added a taper to the back of them. I laid out an angle that looked good to me and used a basic shop-made taper jig to cut the angle on the table saw. This could easily be cut on a circular saw as well. Just follow the line. I grabbed some more 1x4s and trimmed them to size, and then laid out the uprights with the same spacing as the seat supports. I used 1.5 inch screws to attach all the slats and complete the back assembly. Now is a great time to sand everything and apply finish. It's much easier to work with the large flat assemblies than to try to sand into the corners once the sofa is put together. I sanded to 150 grit and applied 3 coats of an exterior grade spar urethane. Before assembly, I put some rubber feet on the bottom of the sides to minimize the contact with the water. I started assembling the couch by clamping some blocks to the armrest sides to position the seat. I laid the seat in place and secured it to the sides with 2 3¼ inch screws per corner. Then I put the back in place and joined it to the seat with 3¼ inch screws through each upright into the seat supports. From the back, I used 2 more screws to secure the outer pieces together, and I put another fastener into the back through the inner supports.
For each of these projects, I have a range of what it might cost you if you bought it out at a store, as well as I want to share with you the cost that it actually takes to make it. And I'm doing it in today's prices, even if I built it a few years ago. So for this outdoor sofa, looking around, you're going to be looking at anywhere between $1,500 to $3,000. So I kind of took a $2,500 price tag, but looking at the cost of what I built, we had about $212 in wood, $67 in hardware and finishing, and then $195 in the cushions for a grand total of $474.94. So if you do that comparison to say that $2,500 couch, you're talking well over a $2,000 savings. Now, if you do want to build any of these plans yourself, we actually have build plans available. There's a link down below in the description, or you can click on this QR code right over here. And that's going to take you to our outdoor furniture bundle. We have designed these plans to make them easy to follow. They have all the parts list and the cut diagram out there so that you can be successful in building your own projects. You don't have to worry about anything, just follow the directions and it's going to turn out great. So check those out if you want to build your own. Let's jump to the next video.
Hey, I'm Brad from Fix This Build That, and today I'm going to show you how to make this concrete top outdoor coffee table. The base is made from cedar. The construction is extremely easy, so anybody can make this. This was my first time working with concrete, and I screwed up a lot of things. So make sure you watch and get some of the pointers and see what I did wrong so that you can do it right when you make your own. The base of the coffee table is made from cedar 2x4s. I started by cutting the 2 aprons, which will connect the sides, and a lower stretcher that will run along the bottom. The sides are basically a simple rectangle. I cut a top and a bottom for each side and a center support piece that are all the same size. Each side has 2 vertical legs, which are the shortest pieces of the base. I was able to get all these parts out of just 3 8-foot 2x4s. With all the cuts done, I sorted through the pieces to find the best side of each board, and then I marked the other sides with a pencil. I used pocket hole joints for this build for quick and easy assembly. It's a perfect application for them because all the holes will be hidden when the table is fully assembled. I drilled pocket holes on the back side of all the parts except for the legs. The first thing I assembled was the sides. The legs are joined to the top and the bottom with glue and 2.5-inch exterior pocket screws. I used a clamp to hold the parts together to minimize any shifting as the screws went through. I did the same thing for the other side, and then my assemblies were done. Next, I flipped the side assemblies on edge and connected one of the aprons. I clamped the parts down to the work table using a face clamp, and this makes sure that everything is flush and secured. Then I put them together with glue and screws. I repeated this for the other side using the same method. Then I flipped the table over and attached the lower stretcher to the bottom, making sure that the bottom of the stretcher was flush with the bottom of the sides. The last part of the table base is to install a center support on the top to help with the weight of the concrete. That concrete is really heavy. I used a scrap block to make sure that the support was flush with the aprons, and then I secured it with glue and screws as well. And that's it, now the base is done. I told you this one is quick and easy. Next I moved on to making the form for the concrete. I bought a full 4x8 sheet of 3/4 inch melamine, but I had them cut a 3-foot section off the end that I'd be getting all my parts from. This made it a lot easier to transport as well as to work with. First I cut off a section to use for the long sides, and I ripped them down to 1.5 inches. This is going to be the thickness of the top. I cross-cut another section for the short sides using my cordless circular saw, and I ripped those down to 1.5 inches as well. I wanted the top to be flush with the sides and have no overhang, so I needed a perfect fit here. To do this, I turned the table base upside down on the oversized melamine and I built the form around it. This way, if the base was slightly off on my dimensions or even if it was a little bit out of square, it really wouldn't matter and the top would fit perfectly. I secured the long sides first using 2-inch screws, then I used one of the short sides as a temporary clamp to reference against while pre-drilling. That way I could move the table and not hit it with the drill when I'm doing my pre-drills. All the screws were countersunk below the surface to allow for screeding the concrete later. You'll see what I mean when I get there. After the long sides were in place, I cut the short sides to fit and I installed them the same way. The sides wanted to lift up a little bit off the form when I was driving the screw at first, but I found that backing them out and then driving them home all the way with my weight on the side would really eliminate that gap and pull the two pieces tight. With the form complete, I grabbed the shop vac and vacuumed up all the dust to make sure there's no particles left over. Then I caulked all the seams with a silicone caulk. I used a corner tool to get smooth beads on the edges, because any small bumps are going to translate in through that concrete. To finish up, I put some tape over all the screws so the concrete wouldn't get into the screw heads. After the silicone was dry, I laid rebar grid over the form and I eyeballed where I needed to cut it. I then used some bolt cutters and cut it down so there's about an inch in from all the sides. Lastly, I cleaned up the form with some rubbing alcohol to get rid of any residue and be prepped for the concrete. Like I said in the intro, this was my first go at mixing concrete. I got a 9-gallon mixing tub with the intent of mixing 1.5 80-pound bags in it. And here's where I started my series of concrete mixing fails. Lesson number 1, don't pour the entire bag into your mixing tub and then add the water. It was super hard to get it all mixed consistently doing this way versus adding smaller amounts of concrete and water one after the other. Lesson 2, use the right size mixing tub. As I was mixing the concrete, I was really focused on getting the right consistency and not really on the size of the tub. At this point, I didn't really think that I could place the current batch and mix a new batch and get it all in there within the 30-minute working time. So I admired all my hard work mixing, chalked it up to learning, and I went out and bought a bigger tub. The 21-gallon tub is what I'd recommend if you plan on mixing more than one bag at a time. And if you're going to do 3 or more, I'd say go ahead and rent a small mixer and save your bag. This time I did it right. I mixed in small portions of cement and water, which made this way easier. I kept going until I had 1.5 bags mixed and about the consistency of peanut butter. And I want to give a shout out here to DIY Pete and Ben Ueda. They both have great YouTube channels, which I'll link to below, and I watched a bunch of their videos to make sure I got all the pointers on how to work with concrete. I started filling the form and working with the concrete until it was about 1 inch thick. Then I took the rebar that I had cut earlier and I pressed it into the concrete, giving it a little flex to make it lay flat. Then I covered it with more concrete to get to the top of the form. After moving it around with my hands, I used a straight piece of wood to screed the surface. You ride the board along the top of the form in a sawing motion, and this levels and distributes the concrete. At this point, I had an audience watching me, and my son was the acting safety captain in the shop.
Oh, no. Here comes the power tools. Plug your ears.
I used a cordless reciprocating saw with no blade in it, and I vibrated the form to help release the air bubbles. I finished up by troweling the bottom surface smooth so it would sit flush on the base. While I was waiting for the concrete to dry, I applied my first coat of outdoor spar urethane on the base. I did 1 full-strength coat and then 3 coats cut with 50% mineral spirits after this one. After 24 hours, I removed the plastic I'd covered the form with and took out all the screws from the sides. I pried the sides off by hand and gave the exposed edges a quick sanding to break the sharp corners. Lesson 3. Spend more time vibrating the form. I ended up with more air bubbles than I really wanted, so I should have gone around maybe 5 or 10 minutes versus just the couple that I did. We flipped the top over, and then I mixed a slurry of Portland cement to a toothpaste consistency and filled in all the air bubbles on the sides and the top. The cement is a little different than the color of the concrete, so next time I'll probably just do a slurry of the concrete alone. Next, I took the tabletop outside and I sanded it with 120 grit and then 220 grit. Lesson 4. Sand the concrete before doing your slurry coat. The sanding exposed more air bubbles, so I had to repeat this process once more after this. After the top had cured a bit more, I put some sealer on it with a microfiber cloth. I applied several coats until it wouldn't penetrate the surface anymore. Before installing the top, I put on some rubber feet on the bottom of the base to keep the wood away from standing water. I put a dollop of silicone on each end of the top boards to keep them from shifting, and then my wife and I set the top on the base. To install the top without pinching our fingers, we used the form sides as spacers and a 2x4 cut to just less than the height of the spacer. I lifted the top while she pulled out a spacer and then I rested it on top of the 2x4. Now I just slowly kicked out the 2x4 from underneath and lowered the top in place. After a few minor adjustments, this thing was ready for the porch.
So looking at pricing for outdoor coffee tables, we were around $550 to $1,200. But the price for our table here, for wood, we had about $61 in wood. Concrete and all the supplies to make that, it was just under $88. Looking at hardware and finish, that was another $41 for a total of $190.78. And that is so super cheap compared to all those. So if we look at the upper end of that buy range, let's call it $1,000, we're gonna save over $800 building that ourselves. And I think it looks amazing. Let's jump to the next one.
Today, I'm going to show you how to make this awesome grilling and chilling station. I started the build with the top frame. The frame is just 2 long pieces the length of the cart and 3 pieces the width of the cooler. I drilled pocket holes in the underside of the short pieces to attach the frame together. To position the middle piece, I secured one side and then put the cooler into position. I butted up the piece and drew a reference mark on the boards. Then I screwed the rest of the frame together with pocket screws. Next, I cut the boards to size for the legs. The legs are 38¼ inches long, for a total height of 39 inches when the top is added. Each leg is made from one full-size 1x4 and one ripped down to 2 3/4. This will give the leg the same width when viewed from the front or the side. I used pocket holes, glue, and clamps to assemble the legs. The pocket holes were drilled only where the wood would be covered by the body of the cart or the lower shelf. In the open space between the holes, I used clamps to hold the legs tight while the glue dried. Next, I cut the boards for the front, back, and sides of the cart. The front and back each need 4 long cladding boards at 44½ inches. The sides are cut at 16½ inches long and also need 4 boards per side. I wanted to add a little detail to the body of the cart, so I used a chamfer bit in my trim router and put a 1/16 inch 45-degree chamfer on the edge of all the cladding boards. When assembled together, they'll have a nice beadboard look, and this will also help hide the gaps when the boards expand and contract with humidity. After the glue was dry on the legs, I took them out of the clamps and laid out the pieces to assemble the sides. I put glue on the legs and tacked the side cladding in place with a brad nailer. Then I came back and pre-drilled and screwed the pieces together with 1 1/4 inch screws. I joined the sides together with the front and the back cladding. I used the same method as I did on the sides. Glue, tack with brad nails, pre-drill, and secure with 1 1/4 inch screws. To prepare for attaching the top later, I used a combination of pocket holes and cleats. I put pocket holes in the cooler cavity where they wouldn't be seen, and I used 3 cleats in the storage bay. The cleats are 3/4 by 3/4 and were pre-drilled before install. I left a space on each corner of the storage bay where the tabs to hold the lid will go. After attaching the cleats for the top, I installed cleats for the wall that separates the cooler and the storage bay. I put them 18 inches from the right side of the cart, and on both the front and the back. These also help align and strengthen the front and the back panels. Next, I cut 4 boards to 15 inches long for the storage cavity wall. I attached them into the cleats with 1 1/4 inch screws and glue. Screws are probably a little overkill here, and you could just as easily get away with attaching them with glue and brad nails. For the bottom of the storage bay, I used another pair of cleats. I put the cleats on the front and the back, 3/4 inch up from the bottom. Installing the boards flush with the bottom gave me the maximum capacity in the storage bay. I cut 5 15-inch boards and screwed them into the cleats from underneath. I had to trim the width of the center board to fit the opening. With the storage bay all buttoned up, I aligned and attached the top, using the cleats on the right and 1 1/4 inch screws, and pocket holes over in the cooler bay. I also used a good amount of glue all along the top edge. Next up, I made the lower shelf. I used 2 46-inch long strips, 1 inch wide, and 11 16.5-inch boards. To make sure I had even spacing, I started with the outer boards and secured them to the strips. Then I secured the middle board. From there, I could just fill in between, and I used a 3/4 inch spacer, making slight adjustments as needed to make sure the gap stayed consistent. You can probably see why I went with brad nails instead of screws. That took a while. Before starting on the lids, I installed the cooler into place. The handles of my cooler butted up against the top, so I just turned the cart upside down and held 3 15-inch boards tight against the cooler bottom. I secured them to the front and the back with 1 1/4 inch pocket hole screws. After loading it up, I can tell this is plenty of support. I made the lid for the storage area first. This lid will sit flush with no handle or hinges, so I put a 1-inch hole in the first board for a little finger hold. I also chamfered the edges for a nice smooth feel. The lid is made from 4 15 3/4 inch boards. They're held together by 2 battens from underneath that are glued and screwed to the underside. I also used the same chamfer treatment on the top of these boards to make sure it had a nice detail and matched the front. I'm not using any hinges for the lid, so I made some small tabs to mount to the underside of the top. They're just little 1.5 by 2 inch blocks with a rounded corner. I attached them into the spaces I left earlier when I was installing the cleats for the top. I just used glue and a couple brad nails, and that'll hold plenty of weight for what I need it to.
Alright, I've got everything assembled now. Let's see how it fits.
I wanted a super clean look for the top, with no screws or nail holes showing. So I built a frame around the lid as tall as the lid plus 3/4 inch, and joined it with pocket holes on the inside. Then I cut 3 cleats to go along the lid and installed them on the frame with pocket holes as well. I cut 5 boards for the top, trimming the width of the center board to fit the frame. I used super glue to temporarily attach the boards where I wanted, leaving the center board unattached. Then I flipped the frame over and screwed the boards to the cleats from underneath for a solid connection. I put the top back on and secured the cooler lid to the wood frame with 1 1/4 inch screw through the outer cleats into the lid. Then I attached the centerpiece in place with some super glue and some wood glue. Super glue will hold tight fast, and the wood glue will have a more permanent bond as it dries. It took a while to figure this one out, but I'm really happy with how it turned out.
It's like watching glue dry.
The drain hardware was the last thing to go on before applying the finish. I used 1/2-inch PVC and 2 male adapters to make the connection between the cooler and the hose bib. I cut a small block for mounting the hose bib and glued it in place with clamping pressure from the fittings. I applied a thick coat of spar urethane to all the parts with a sponge brush. Then I came back and wiped on 2 coats of a 2-to-1 spar to mineral spirits mixture. The cart will be under my porch and it won't be getting any direct weather. If it would be out in the elements, I probably would have added more full-strength coats. I left the lower shelf off to make finishing a little bit easier. I went back and attached the shelf 2.5 inches up off the ground and attached it with 2 screws into each leg. Doing it the way I did was a little awkward. I should have just turned the unit upside down instead of trying to do it while laying on its back. The last piece was to add the hardware. I installed 3-inch utility hinges on the top, 3 inches from the outside. I added a handle on the front lid and a bottle opener on the leg next to the cooler. I ended up adding 2 hooks later on the other side for grill tools as well. You'll see those in the final photos.
We get the lid on here for the chilling part. We got the grilling stage. Inside I have got some inserts that go on my grill. They fit in here. I actually have 4 different inserts that fit in here. This is going to be a great addition to my back deck, and I can't wait to put this thing into use.
Now for a patio cooler, we locked in on this one right here. That's about $800. So if you're gonna be building your own though in the wood, you're gonna have $237. For the cooler and some of those hardware and supplies, we're talking about $51, and then hardware and finish just under $33. So that total is gonna be $321.97. So if you compare that over to the retail, we're saving over $475 building that on our own. And again, if you wanna build this one in any of the projects, we do have the outdoor project bundle that has all of these plans in there. You can check it out, link down below in the description, or hit that QR code on the screen. Let's jump over to the next project. As a woodworker, I'm a little embarrassed to say I've been using these aluminum outdoor chairs on my back deck, along with the cedar furniture that I built that looks amazing. So today I'm gonna make a couple modern outdoor chairs to complete that set. I'm gonna use this cedar, and I'm gonna show you how to save a little bit of money using larger timbers also. Right now, lumber prices are really high, but what I could find are these 4x4 timbers, so I can take these and cut them in half and get the 2x4s cheaper than I could find them anywhere else. The 4x4 is about 3 3/4 inch thick, so we can cut it in 2 passes on the table saw. I'll set the blade to just under 2 inches, run it through, and then flip it over on the other side. Now, I did use the joiner and the planer to clean things up, but you could really do the whole thing on the table saw if you just take your time and make those passes, and you might have to just clean things up with a sander. The grain on these are really nice, and that's a nice advantage of using 4x4 timber, is that the grain is typically a lot better and less knots than in the 2x4s. I can start going through the lumber and picking out the nicest pieces for the arms, which will really be the show pieces of the chairs. So I'll probably pick one of these that's nice and clear versus a guy like this that has a little sapwood down the middle. But you can make it however you want it. But now I can cut these to the length so we can start assembling the sides. Man, this smells good. I've got all the parts cut now, and I got a little mock-up of how this is gonna look. So how do you give some style to 2x4 furniture? And I went with a 15-degree bevel on this front armrest. It's gonna give it a nice little modern feel to it. I'll be using some through dowel joinery on the top, which I think will look really nice, and some pocket hole joinery on the bottom because it will be concealed. But before I jump into that, I do wanna address some of these really nasty knots and fill those with epoxy so that they can dry overnight, and then I can be ready for assembly in the morning. All right, I've got these all cleaned up, and now I can do that pocket hole joinery here on the bottom. All right, now we can get into assembly, and again, this is how we're gonna look here. When you start working with angles, it's nice to have some little offcuts. So I saved a few little offcuts of the 15 degrees, so I can put this over here on the edge so that I have a nice flat surface, because if you don't do that, then the clamp will slide up as you try to put pressure on it. I'm gonna put a little outdoor glue on the ends here. I marked a few spots on the back and the front, and the blue tape is basically just to help for tear out, because cedar will tear out very easily when you're drilling it from the top. I've got this all clamped up and ready to drill the dowels from the top, and I've got a piece of blue tape to know when to stop so that the dowel will be exactly where I want it to be, which is halfway in between the bottom and the top pieces. All right, now we can put it all together. All right, that went pretty smoothly. I've got it in the clamps. It's gonna dry up, and then we can plug those holes later, but I've got 3 more sides to make, so I gotta do that. If you wanna get all the measurements and build your own, I do have plans available. There's a link down below in the description. After a little bit of time in the clamps, we're all ready to go, and now I've got these dowel holes here that are exposed. So we need to fill those, and I'm going to use a plug cutter for that. I'm gonna go over to the drill press to do it. You can also do them with a hand drill. Drill press is way easier. So to make the plugs, I'm gonna use this plug cutter right here. I'm gonna chuck it up in the drill press. And these guys are really fun to use. I gotta show you guys something that I found is really interesting while I was cutting those dowels, and it has to do with which way that you cut them and the orientation of the wood. So my first idea was to cut down on the face of the wood. But as I pulled those off the plug cutter, I could tell that these looked really nasty. You can see they are all bumpy, and that's because the grain runs in this direction, and we're cutting across that. So you can see all this little tear out here, and that won't be a nice filled hole. So I grabbed some other pieces, and I started drilling on the end grain. They are much more smooth, and they're with the grain, so this is a very solid piece, and there's no tear out on the sides here at all. Obviously, this one that is going through the end grain is gonna be way stronger versus this one here that we drilled down on the face grain. That will mean that once I put finish on them, it's gonna be contrasting instead of blending in, but that's okay. Again, design feature. Now I can just take the dowels, put a little bit of glue on it, and then tap it in. And then, of course, make sure you line up the grain lines with the grain on the wood. We'll just let that dry and then cut it flush and sand it, and it'll be good. And when you're flush cutting plugs, a playing card is gonna help save your wood. All right, so all you have to do is put that right there on the plug, and then that is going to protect. And now the saw teeth don't go into the wood at all. So the chair sides are looking good, and now we can move on to the seat base, which is gonna be just a simple rectangle. I'm gonna be doing add these 2x4s, joining them together with pocket screws, and then putting some supports on the sides to hold the slats, which will support the cushions. Let's go ahead and get it done. All right, I haven't attached the slats just yet because I want to finish everything first before I screw it down, because it'll be way easier instead of trying to work through the nooks and the cracks. But now we can start working on the back of the chair, and I'm going to cut the pieces and cut a nice angle on them so they'll have a 15-degree splay on it, and then we'll talk about joinery for attaching the slats. All right, here are the uprights, and it's got a nice little 15-degree angle here, so I think that'll be comfy. Now I've got some more slats. These are just like the ones for the bottom here, but instead of having these on top, I want them to be flush with the back. So I'm actually going to recess these in and cut some dados out on the table saw. So I'll lay out 3 positions here for these slats, and then we'll gang them all together and cut them all at once on the saw. All right, the notches are looking great, but one more thing I want to add here is just a little design, and it's a little thick up here at the top. So what I did on the last couch, I'll do it here as well, is put a nice taper down here. So I'm going to lay it out with the line, and then we'll go to the table saw and use the tapering jig. So now I can take my tapering jig, and I do have a video on how to make this if you want to check it out. And then just use the line to line it up on the edge, and then lock this into place. And then I can get consistent tapers, cut the first one, take it off, put the next one in there, and do all 4 of them right in a row. Right now we can attach the backs to the base, and they've got this nice angle on here. Love the taper. But instead of just attaching it with a screw in the front like I did last time, I'm gonna go more through the meat of the upright. But first, I need to counterbore a hole through here so that the screw can go in deep enough into the wood below it. I'll do that with my Forstner bit here, but you could also do that with a spade bit or just a large drill bit. Now we'll just attach it with a healthy bit of glue and drive those screws through there. Now that'll be a nice solid connection. Then once we sandwich this in between the arms and connect this into the arms, it's gonna be a really solid connection. So I'll just do the rest of these and we can move on to final finish. And the thing about woodworking is you gotta really think about a lot of different angles, literally and figuratively. As I was putting in the screw, I realized that one single screw is not enough to keep something from rotating. And the first 3 went great, but on the final upright, it was kind of moving around and it wasn't really anchored properly. So, you know, mistakes were made, but you're gonna run into that. And the thing is finding solutions. So all I did was grab my drill bit here. This is actually from my pocket hole jig, and was able to just drill in just a little recess and tap in another screw. So when you make the mistake, just figure out how you can easily fix that. And in this one, it was a simple fix. So I just went ahead and tagged in the screw on each of the uprights. Now everything's gonna be super solid. And as I put the legs in, I won't have any concerns about anything rotating, and we'll be good. So mistakes were made, solutions were found. It's always easier to do sanding and finish work before you assemble. So I'm gonna go ahead and round over all the edges on everything and get everything sanded up before I start assembling and doing the finish work. So now we're going to attach the sides to the seat base, but I've moved that apart, and I'm going to use these little straight edges. I'll put the seat height right around 16.5 inches for the top of that cushion, so you might need to adjust yours accordingly. But I can clamp that in place on both sides and then set the chair down and start attaching it. With any luck, I will not completely topple this over. So I can see an issue. This side here is just splayed out just a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and connect the slats on the top first, and that will make sure that everything is parallel and the same size from the top to the bottom, and it won't get in the way of attaching the sides. All right, the back is ready, but I am gonna put a little bit of glue on there because, you know, screws are great, but glue is also awesome. And I don't want it to get everywhere, so I'm just gonna go just a bit. Just a little something, something. Just a scotch. Maybe a little pinch. Little sweet. All right, coming down. Oh boy. Objects in video may be harder to clamp than they appear. Now for the front legs here, I'm gonna go to a number 10 3-inch screw and just countersink a couple underneath there, and that should be perfect to hold it in place, plus the glue will be great. We're going over the top.
Let's go! Let's go!
All right. All right, to flip the chair around, and the last thing we're gonna do on the assembly is put another screw through the back. It's kind of the same idea as before, because right now the screws are kind of all in one plane on this arm, so I wanna have one higher up as well. So I'm gonna tag one through right here on the upright. I'll sink the screw in there and put a little cedar plug in there and just sand it flush. Now for finish on my outdoor chairs, and especially cedar, I like to do a 3-step process. I'll go with the Total Boat wood sealer, then I will do a coat of gloss, maybe 2 coats, and then finish off with a coat of satin. And that'll be great for outdoor use, and it's gonna hold up really well. Plus it's undercover, so it should last for several years before it needs more. Looking at the cost of chairs, we're going anywhere from $8.99 up to $1,450, and that's per item. So we'd have to double that to get the cost. Now, for our chair, we had in the wood $115, just under that. Hardware and finish, $75.83. Cushions were $65 for a total of $255.68. And that's for the first chair. Now for the second chair, you can use a lot of that hardware because we're gonna have those extra screws. You can use the same can of finish, etc. So actually that one comes in just under $180. So for 2 chairs, you're looking at $435.53. So if we compare that at 2 chairs at $1,250 a piece, that'd be $2,500. You could save almost $2,000 just by building it on your own. And I think they look great again. Let's hit the next video. Today I have a special guest in the shop, Pete from DIY Projects with Pete. Pete helped me out with the concrete tops for these. I made both of these outdoor side tables out of 4 cedar 2x4s, 1 bag of concrete, and only 2 power tools. So check it out, it's a great project. Let's see how we did it.
We started by building the form for the concrete tops. I used a leftover piece of 3/4 inch melamine from another project for the form. I ripped 4 1.5 inch strips the full length of the sheet for the walls of the form. I cut 2 of the long strips in half, and then I ganged together 3 of those pieces and cut them down to 20 inches, leaving me 2 long sides, 2 short sides, and 1 divider. With the dusty part done, we moved into the shop and started building the form. We clamped and screwed down 1 long side using a countersink bit and 2-inch screws. We used the factory edges here on the large sheet, and this will give you a good 90-degree corner. To make sure the second long edge was parallel to the first one, we used the divider in the other short end as a spacer and put that long edge against it and screwed it in place. The tops are 20 by 20, so Pete measured in 20 inches from the end, and then we attached the center divider. Using that divider to get 2 tops from one form makes things a lot easier when you vibrate and screed the concrete layer. We secured the other end and then vacuumed the form clean, and here's where Pete showed me a cool tip to get the silicone bead in the form for those nice clean edges. Pete taped around the whole form, leaving about a 1/4 inch gap for the caulk. Then we applied the caulk, smoothed it out with a wet finger, and then remove the tape. You want to remove this right away and don't let it set up at all. Going back over the caulk one more time with a wet finger smooths out any little lips left from the tape. This was a cool little trick to make sure that the caulk went exactly where I wanted it and didn't get all over the sides when I was smoothing it out like I did last time. While the caulk was drying, we went back outside to cut the parts for the base. I'm using cedar 2x4s here from a local building supply store for the base, and you don't need a miter saw to get decent crosscuts on these boards. Just clamp a carpenter's square to your board and use it to guide you for that 90-degree cut. Each base is made from just 11 boards in 3 different sizes, and these all come out of 2 2x4s. After cutting the first of each similar size board, we just laid that board back on top of the remaining 2x4 and butted it up against the end. Then I used a spacer to set where my carpenter's square needed to go. The spacer is just the width between the outside edge of my circular saw and the outside edge of the circular saw blade. This makes short work of cutting down all the pieces. Just make sure you have proper support or a helping hand so the boards don't bind up and drop off or cause tear out at the end of the cuts. With the form ready to go, we started mixing the concrete. I found the best way to mix concrete is have somebody else do it. Seriously though, Pete made this look so much easier than the first time I had to go at it, but I think the keys here are going to be adding some water first, using a big enough mixing tub, and just adding water as needed until you get that oatmealish consistency. We used a garden hoe here, which works great, but you can also use a shovel to mix the concrete too. I started transferring the mix from the tub to the form while Pete worked it into place, and he was pushing it into the corners and the edges and doing a little bit of vibrating of the form along the way. I used a scrap of wood to screed the surface after it was full. I was sawing it back and forth as Pete filled any voids exposed by the screeding. This 80-pound bag of concrete that we used was just slightly less than we needed, so we did actually have to dip into a second bag. After doing a little more vibrating to get all the air bubbles out, we set the form back inside to dry overnight. Keeping with the minimalist theme here, I decided to use the handheld pocket hole jig for the joints. All these boards but the upright legs get pocket holes on each end. Assembly is very straightforward and it goes really quick. I used glue and 2.5-inch exterior screws for each joint and started by making 2 U-shaped assemblies, which will be the sides without the top pieces. Next, I joined the sides with a front and back stretcher, clamping the boards firmly in place before securing them. Then I came back and added a top piece to the sides. And the tops would have gotten in the way of my drill while I was attaching the stretchers, so that's why I added them afterwards. The last piece is a base stretcher, which is centered between the sides and shores up the strength of the table. I sanded the whole base with 150 and 220 grit sandpaper. Okay, let's be serious here. About 2 seconds after this shot, I grabbed my random orbital sander, but technically you don't need it for this build. After sanding, I applied 4 coats of an oil-based outdoor spar urethane. I thinned each coat with mineral spirits to make it easy to wipe on with a rag here. I just love how this brings out the depth and the character of the cedar. An oil-based finish is much better than a water-based in my opinion to bring out that color. The next morning, Pete was back and we took the concrete out of the forms. We removed the sides and I sanded the edges with 120 grit to keep them from chipping. We were in a time crunch here for Pete's visit, so we probably took these out a little early, and you can see here how wet this top still was. To help the tops dry a little faster though, we flipped them over onto some scrap pieces of wood and let the air flow all around the concrete to help it dry. The corners and edges of the top had some voids in them from the form, so I used a little leftover concrete to fill the holes in the gaps. I took a colander to sift out the large aggregate from the mix and made a paste that I applied to the needed areas. Last time I used a Portland cement to do this, and I'd recommend going that route or using a finer sifter for your mix. It was a little harder to apply than I thought it would be, and it just took me a little bit more time to get it into all the little bitty holes. After the repairs dried, I sanded everything lightly with 320 grit paper to try and not crumble off the repairs. Then I sealed the tops and the sides with concrete sealer using a microfiber cloth. It was easier to control the sealer when pouring it onto the cloth versus straight onto the concrete. And if you want to be extra careful, you can wait the full 28 days before applying the sealer for a full cure. But I left the bottom unsealed to allow moisture to transfer out and further curing. And I did the same thing on my concrete coffee table, and it's been totally fine after 9 months. Before putting the tops on the bases, I attached some rubber feet on the bottom of each table to keep them off the ground and keep them away from any standing water. I used a dab of silicone on the corners of the top, and then the weight of the concrete top is going to help hold that down to the base. These side tables turned out great, and I love how they go with the rest of the patio furniture.
Now for outdoor side tables, these are a little bit less expensive, but they're still $250 up to maybe $600. And again, we needed 2 of them, so we're gonna go ahead and double that. So I'm gonna put that at $500 a piece for $1,000 store-bought. Now for what we built, we had wood at $82, concrete and supplies, $69, hardware and finish at $41 for a total of $192.49 for that first side table. And again, on this one, we can use a lot of those materials that we had. So that second table is only gonna cost us $95.61. So grand total for 2 side tables would be $288.10. So comparing that at $1,000 for a store-bought option, you're gonna save over $700 doing it on your own. All right, let's jump into the next. I'm just gonna say it. I do not like a traditional Adirondack chair. Oh, I don't like the way that the butt is way down to the ground and you might just sit there and never be able to get up. So today, I'm gonna give my take on an Adirondack chair that doesn't put you on the ground, and I think it's gonna turn out awesome. So I'm gonna be using cedar for this build, and I've got some rough cedar 2x4s here, but I can't really see the grain, so I'm gonna run through the plan real quick and then we'll see what we're working with. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with cedar because there are a lot of knots in these boards and the color doesn't match exactly how I would like it to, but it's what I could find. I'll pick through these and figure out which ones are best, and then we'll start building the legs and the seat base. So the front legs on my Adirondack chair are gonna be straight up, but for the back legs, we're not gonna go for the typical Adirondack where they just lean them all the way back and it's like some crazy harsh angle and you just can hardly get up out of it. But instead, we're gonna go with a 15-degree angle with a much more flat seat to relax and actually enjoy yourself in. So, let's do it. Now, I cut the first 15-degree angle on the back leg, but now I have to cut the bottom one. And what I want to do is make sure that the length of it is going to be the same length as the front. And so I just came up with this little idea, and I don't know if this is going to work or not, but we're going to try it. So what I'm going to do is take this little offcut that came off the end, and this is at 15 degrees, and I'm going to butt this up against the straight leg, and then I'm going to bring over my angled leg. So now this is flush across the top, and now I can just strike a flush line across this bottom, and it should work. So now I got it 15 degrees the other way, and I can just line it up against my mark and then use this little point against my stop block and cut the other 3 back legs. I'm making 2 chairs if I didn't say that. I went ahead and cut the little top stretcher that's gonna connect the front and back legs, put a little 15-degree angle on that as well. And here is what the little assembly is gonna look like. So this is gonna fit together or drop, and it's cedar, so you know, it's probably destroyed now. All right, this is gonna go together just like this. And have a nice little 15-degree splay, and yeah, now we just need some joinery. You can do joinery a lot of different ways on these. You can use pocket screws, you can use dowels, or I'm gonna be using some dominoes. Well, look at Mr. Fancy Pants. You drank that green Kool-Aid, didn't you? Yes, Chuck, I've got a domino now. Yeah, I bet they send them things free to all you influencers. No, unfortunately, they did not send this to me for free. I had to buy it with my own money. Well, you gonna give me that $70 Comax you done showed? Yeah, I mean, the Comax is still good, and like, you can have it if you want it. Well, hot dog, I'm happier than a pig in mud. All right, Chuck, you enjoy that thing. All right, let's do some joinery. All right, now let's do a little dry fit and see how these go together. All right, there we go. That turned out perfect. I guess we can do a glue up now. Glue ups can be super stressful, and so to make things a little bit easier, I have a little box of goodies just for this situation. These are offcuts that are different degrees of angles, and I've got them marked on the back here. So we've got 15, we've got 10, we've got 12. I'm going to use these to help clamp, and then that way it won't slide as much and move around. So keep a little thing of offcuts and gluing some sandpaper on there, It's gonna make your glue-ups a lot easier. You're still gonna have disasters, but at least it'll be an easy disaster. And I am using an outdoor wood glue that is waterproof. I'm just gonna take this 15 degree and put it right here at the end, and then that way I can clamp it all straight. So this clamp is wanting to pull this in a little bit, so I'm just gonna throw a little square in here and hold that in place while it dries. So I'm gonna clamp up the other 3 and then let them dry overnight and they'll be ready tomorrow. Now, even though I despise the Adirondack chair sitting angle, I think one thing they do well is they have kind of a contoured seat. So a nice little place for your buttocks. So I want my chairs to have a nice little curve on the seat as well, and I drew this up in SketchUp and I took over to the CNC and cut out this little 1/4 inch MDF template. And that's got just a nice little curve here, and I'll use this to cut out my 2x4s for the seat and get identical sides. If you don't have to move a ladder to make long cuts on your miter saw, are you really even in a garage shop? I don't know if you know this or not, but I have a major fear of commitment with my projects. I was kind of worried about the seat and how it's going to feel, so I built this. This thing is a monstrosity. This is a mock-up of the seat. I actually cut out some little MDF side runners that are thicker and then put some legs so the seat height would be the same. It's even got a nice little ergonomical back. I'm going to put the slats on here and sit on it and see how it feels. This could be a disaster. So I'm just gonna lay the little seat slats down here. And, oh boy, I hope that doesn't happen to me when I sit down. All right, this is looking good. And this front part is actually what I'm worried about how it's gonna feel on there. I'm not sure how I'm gonna keep these without, ooh, tape. All right. This is so janky. And because I'm too lazy to go get my wide angle lens, I'm just gonna sit on it up here. This could be a really bad idea. All right. Oh my gosh. These front legs are a little wobbly. I'm not even thinking about how the seat feels. I'm just thinking about dying. This is nice. Yeah, I thought it was going to be too deep, maybe. I like this. All right. Actually, I guess we're done. This is Chuck's new Adirondack chair. Now, this fit me okay, but I think we need to see how it fits some other members of the family. So have my son come up here and check it out. All right, come on, jump up there.
I don't know how I feel about this.
I know, you should not feel good about it.
Why is it taped?
Don't worry about it. No, it's okay.
Good.
Just sit down gently. Scooch back.
I feel tall.
Feel tall? So the seat feels high?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Especially since it's on a table.
Well, yes, that's true.
It feels like a nice seat. It also feels like splinters.
Well, we will sand it down, I promise. All right, nice work. All right, I do feel good about this shape, and so now I can transfer it over to the parts for the seat that the little slats are gonna sit onto. And also I can just kind of look at this and try to avoid some of the knots. I'll double stick tape this on there and then cut away most of the excess, and then I'll use a pattern bit to get it exactly the size of the template. Now I can just pry the template off here. Now I can just use this and the flush trim bit on the other ones. I do need to cut the 15-degree bevel on the back here still, so the template just wasn't quite long enough for the piece that I had. But we could go on the rest of them, and then we could put the seat together. I've got the seat bases already, and I've got the big stack of slats right here to go on top of them. But I don't want to just assemble these straight on there because I'm going to have to finish them, and these slats are going to be really tight together with only about 1/8 of an inch apart, and so it'd be really hard to get finish in between there, even if I was spraying, which I'm not gonna be. So before I put the finish on these pieces, I do want to put the countersunk holes in there, and I have a little drill press set up with a countersink bit and a little jig I made so I can just put it on there and drill down to the exact spot on each one, because you want to make sure that it is perfectly centered and aligned. Of course, this is cedar, which I mentioned, which is a pretty knotty wood. It's always doing bad things. So I'm gonna fill these knots with CA glue, so it just helps that finish stand up over time and water won't seep in there and try to rot out the wood. Since this is outdoor furniture, I want to use a marine grade finish, so I'm going to use some Total Boat Gleam 2.0. And for the first coat, I'll thin it by 25%, and then for the rest of them, we'll do them full strength. And we'll have about 3 coats total. And I'm going to do that over on the table so I can keep working on other things while that's drying. I'm going to assemble the chair base actually just like I did the mock-ups. 2 little stretchers that go across on the inside, so that'll keep everything nice and stable as I'm putting on the slats. And I did clamp down a straight edge to the front. I'm going to reference the front of the seat bases on those because if these are off a little bit, it could make that front be off and then the slats would look weird. So the base coat is dry and now I'm gonna do some assembly and then I'm actually gonna spray on the final coats after everything is assembled. I've got the 13 slats here and I'm gonna start with this and pre-drill it and then screw it in and then work my way back. And I have these little 1/8 inch spacers that I'm gonna put in between each little rung. I may not do it in the front because they kind of open up, but definitely in the back. And then that will let water drain if it does get wet and it will have a really nice look to it. Whoop. Oh my gosh, last one I dropped it. All right. Woo, that's looking good. Oh yeah, that looks nice. And next up, I'm gonna make the armrest. And I went ahead and cut it out on the CNC again. And I have a little template here. And I like it being nice and wide because it'll be a place to put a drink, maybe a plate, some donuts, coffee. I don't eat coffee, Mountain Dew. So I got these wide cedar boards and I traced the outline with a little extra on it. I'm gonna cut that out on the bandsaw, then I'm gonna come back and trim it flush with the router. The last pieces of the shape are the back, and I'm gonna have 5 boards per back, and there's gonna be a 1/4 inch spacer in between each of them. Now I wanna have the nice traditional arch top on there, because I do like that look of the Adirondack chair. And I have a straight edge down here, so I'm gonna clamp it down and line everything, and then draw my arc on the top. With the rough shape cut out on the bandsaw, now I'm just going to sand to the edge on my edge sander here. And because it is symmetrical, I can take these outer ones and then just flip it and sand them both at the same time up to that line. All right, it's time for this thing to start coming together. I've got the legs here. I'm gonna put the base on and I'm going to clamp a little scrap here to the side, and I'm gonna do that on both sides and then allow that to rest on top, and then we'll secure it with screws from the inside to keep all the fasteners hidden. All right, should be able to take these off, see what it looks like. I've got the back laid out here and I've already got the spacers in, and the way I'm gonna hold this together and assemble it is there's gonna be a board across the bottom that will run the whole width, and this will actually fit down in between the little seat sides, and then on the top we'll have another one to hold everything together. And after this, I've got one more cleat there that I'm gonna put across the back as high as I can go to get that good support and link it into the armrests. All right, let's see how we did. These spacers out. No screws poking through, so that's a win. All right, let's get this in the chair. I haven't exactly played out how this is gonna work, but let me start by seeing if this fits in here. Okay, now I need to figure out how to get 15 degrees. Oh my gosh, don't just fall through, please. Oh, like that. All right, I got my little angle finder, which is usually used for the table saw, but I guess it'll work here too. All right, let's see what we can get. Is right about there. Ooh. Aha. Okay. All right, this will work. All right, everything is held into place, and I'm gonna drill a couple holes here to go in and secure it from each side, and then I'll counterbore those so I can later plug those with some cedar dowels. Now I can use this last cleat on the back, and I will ride this all the way up to the top of the armrest. So I'll get as much support on that back as I can, and then I'll do the same thing, attaching it through the side and then plugging up those holes. Now to attach the dinner platters, or excuse me, the armrest, I'm gonna have these right up here, and they're gotta put your dent in your project before you put it into use. It makes it easier. Anyway, they're gonna go right here. And that is a great segue into, to have some support for this wide overhang, I made these little corbels and I just cut these out and sanded them on the sander and put little countersunk holes in there. So I'm gonna countersink some holes under this base piece here, and I'll screw straight up into it, and then put this little corbel right here, and we should be nicely supported and not have it fall off. Now this is what an Adirondack chair should be. The seat height is perfect for calisthenics or just getting up. And we've got these nice big armrests to put your cold drink and just enjoy your summer. Now looking at Adirondack chairs, and again, these are gonna be the low slung ones because the Not-An-Adirondack chair doesn't exist. So when you build your own, you're actually gonna have something custom that you can't really buy. Looking at Adirondack chairs, you're talking $250 to $1,000 a pop. So let's just call it $750. So you'd be looking at about $1,500 for buying 2 Adirondack chairs. For the cost of building our Adirondack chair, we had $104 into the wood, $66 into the hardware and finish, for a total of $170. So you can build one of these really inexpensively. And looking at that second chair, it is gonna be under $100, coming in at $99. So if we built 2 of those guys, $268.94. And comparing that to $1,500, you've got over a $1,300 savings. So adding up all those items together of what we spent versus what we could buy, we saved over $7,320 just by doing it ourselves. And again, if you want to build your own and enjoy those savings and just wonderful back deck furniture setup, you can do that with the plans down below in the description or the QR code, and get that outdoor project bundle that has all these in it and actually a few other plans as well. If you want to check out 7 DIY projects to make your backyard look amazing, I got the video queued up for you right there. I'm Brad. Until next time, get out there and build something awesome.